is started by Rotarians and run by Rotarians, and so it's always nice for you to know what we're doing in your name, right? So you're going to see some numbers up here occasionally, like that one, and I'm going to have you shout out what you think they represent. So the first one is about 40%, and the apple is a little bit of a clue.
40% of produce are apples.
Close. Does have to do with food. Does have apples. Good, yeah. So about 40% of all food produced in the U.S. is wasted. That number varies a little, but that's about what it is. And that's everywhere from in the field all the way to you left it in the back of your fridge and didn't get to it in time, and restaurants and everything in between. So that's a pretty big number, especially as our population increases and we've got to feed more people. So the waste that happens, I'm going to talk about specifically the waste that happens at the agricultural level. So there are two kinds of waste. There are what we call now the ugly fruit, so something like this with an apple that's misshapen or slightly off color, but completely edible and healthy. Or simply a surplus. So, unfortunately the produce doesn't always come all year long. There's a heavy season for each crop, and we kind of flood the market at that particular time, which is, starting to come up. We're starting to get the apples and things like that. And then we also produce a lot of potatoes here in the state and several other crops. So when it all comes in, it goes out, but it can't always have a buyer. And so then sometimes it's absolutely beautiful produce, but just a surplus. And sometimes if there isn't, a lot of times actually, if there isn't a place for it to go, it does this. Either rots in the field, or much worse, is taken to a landfill. And it's completely edible food, and we also have people that are hungry, so what can we do about that? And here's some folks in line at a food bank, and there's another number for you, 60%. What do you think that one is?
Increase in food bank usage.
That was true when we saw the dip in the economy several years ago, but this one actually refers to the people.
60% are children.
That's very good. So 60% are children and seniors, and we're actually the largest population base or age base. We're seeing an increase in our seniors. So a lot of folks, as pensions are becoming sort of a thing of the past, seniors are people that are coming more and more to the food banks, healthcare costs or other things driving them there. And so those are the two ends of sort of the age spectrum, and they're the two groups most vulnerable to poor nutrition. So the children who are just growing and learning and their brains are forming without that good nutrition have everything from behavior problems at school to stunted growth to health problems. And seniors, sometimes just a healthy diet can make the difference between being able to stay in your home or having to go and live in a more assisted living type of situation. And then 1 in 5, this one might be a little easier. Or not.
Households in the United States access a food bank each year.
No, that's a good guess, but a little closer to home. Yeah, I can see you want to guess. Go ahead and guess. So?
In the 1 in 5 are under the poverty level?
Yeah, basically 1 in 5 are using food banks or food insecure in Washington state, so bringing it a little more local. That number varies a little between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6, but about 1 in 5 is generally accepted based on the numbers that Northwest Harvest has been able to gather. So that's a pretty good chunk. It's about 20% of our people. And again, most of them are children and seniors. So in 1982, there was one Rotarian who is a member of the university, or was, he's passed away, the University District Club, so in the Seattle area, who said, people are hungry, the food bank system was just getting started, so there really wasn't a good sort of influx of food to people who needed food. So he said, let's do sort of that model that they did during the World Wars and say, everybody plant an extra row in your garden. All Rotarians in my club plant an extra row. And so they did. And it was actually a really successful program. So one person made a difference. So then the Rotarians started thinking, well, wait a minute, if we were that good, what else can we do? And so it happened to be that the new chief of police at the University of Washington was also in the club, a new member. And he said, I'll just put out an APB and see what we can get, see if we can get some produce from farmers around the state. Now, in this day and age, you'd probably be fired for that, but in that day and age, it was okay. So he did. He put out an APB, and the next day, they got an answer. Someone in Othello, a police chief there, knew of a farmer who had 50,000 pounds of onions and said, come get them. So the Rotarians probably went, oh no, what do we do now? And so they worked with their network and they found a trucking company who was owned by a Rotarian, and they sent a truck out and brought it back and then had to figure out, now what do we do with all these onions? So it's one of those good ideas run away kind of thing. But it worked out really good, and we like to joke about this picture because you got the one guy working, showing us his best side, and the four Rotarians monitoring his progress. So at that point, it was a runaway success, and they incorporated as a nonprofit. We've been a nonprofit ever since. I wasn't involved then, but it's became the power of many. So they said, ooh, this is bigger than us, and started gathering other Rotary clubs in the area to help out. So there's another number, big one.
Pounds of produce?
Pounds of produce that we've collected since we started. So we're just about to approach our 200 million anniversary, and we're very excited about that. We think we'll do it in October will be the time, and we'll have a celebration then. So 200 million pounds that have not only gone to feed hungry people, but haven't gone to the dump, that haven't become garbage, which is just an incredible amount. But of course there's more, and we see there is a food bank in Nogales, so right on the border, that sends us pictures. We're seeing trucks get refused at the border, not because they had a bug problem or anything, but just someone would make an order and then get a cheaper order and refuse it, and that's allowed in that industry. It's kind of a shame. And so the truck would head immediately to the dump in Nogales. And so slowly by slowly, those kind of situations are being dealt with, but unfortunately it really does happen way too often, and even now. So what we decided to do, or Rotarians like us decided to, was connect and collaborate. So one thing we do is we have a lot of relationships. We have a lot of people in a lot of different industries, businesses, people who have different friends, and so that was the motto, and that was the philosophy from the beginning, is rather than duplicate systems, rather than have stuff that's already there, we're just going to make connections. We're going to be the big broker, networker for hunger relief. So we don't actually have any warehouse. We don't have any trucks. We don't have any forklifts or anything like that. We have a staff of 3 actually right now, because one of us went back to grad school. So who run it all, who make it happen, and we use existing systems like with Food Lifeline, Northwest Harvest, EFN, to use their warehouses and get them the produce, and they get it out to their constituents. So there's no duplication and no waste. So our core work is, again, getting that produce, because if you've helped at a food bank, you've probably seen, what have you seen there on the shelves?
Loads of canned food.
Loads of canned foods. What else have you seen? Like day-old pastries, tops, chips. So not always the most healthy food, and it's not the food bank's fault. That's what they get donated from bakeries and from individuals. The produce, fruits and vegetables are very perishable, and nobody thinks to bring them. Occasionally someone with an apple tree in their yard might pick them and bring them, but that's very rare actually. So they very much want produce. And so what we do is we take a farmer, this is Jack, he has a huge potato farm up in Skagit County, and he actually is a Rotarian as well, and he calls us and says, I've got a semi-truck, so about 40 to 50,000 pounds. Sometimes I've got 2 or 3 semi-truck loads. Come get them. And then my coworker, Katie's job is to find a truck and get it there within a day and get it picked up, as well as find a place for it to go. And we try and get it to whoever can handle it. So we couldn't roll in to a small local food bank with the semi-truck or 2 or 3. They would, and they wouldn't have anywhere to put it. So we usually work with the big guys, which again is Northwest Harvest, Food Lifeline, EFN, Coastal Harvest, and get it to them, and then they get it out to the small food banks. So a lot of times the small food banks don't know who we are. Sometimes they do. But the big guys definitely do, because we're often their large supplier. So then we connected up with a trucking company. So Ed is actually a Rotarian, and as in most of his family, and they own Oak Harbor Freight. I'm sure you've seen those trucks. So we call up someone like him and we say, hey, we've got to move this load. And sometimes, often, not always, he'll say, sure, I'll send a truck, and it will be for free. Ideally, what we do is if a truck is coming back empty, say across the pass, and we find out we've got some produce in eastern Washington, we can have the dead space or the empty space in that truck filled, and so we're not even using any extra gas. But it doesn't always work. There are a few runs where nobody has trucks going, or the trucks are all busy or whatever, and so then we do pay for trucking. And then this is Q, and he works at the Northwest Harvest Warehouse in Kent, not too far from here. And he takes our produce that we bring in, again in semi-trucks, and organizes the folks who come in as volunteers to sort it. So, and then it goes out to all the food banks. So we have work parties, and those are Rotarians and Rotaractors and Interactors who come along and sort it if it needs to be sorted. So some of the times the produce needs to be bagged into family-sized portions. Sometimes it needs to be put in, comes in a huge bin of apples, and it needs to be boxed in more apple box type. And there's no funding for that. The farmer doesn't want to pay for that because they've donated it. And we try and save the funds for the trucking or whatever we need, so we bring in volunteers and pack it up, send it out. So Rotarians doing that work. It's also a great opportunity for the intergenerational service. So we see Rotaractors, Interactors, and Rotarians working together, as well as exchange students. So this was our district's exchange students 2 years ago. So the girls are actually from all different countries. The girl on what would be, I guess you're right, was my club's exchange student from Hong Kong. But they were from all over, and they had a ball getting to see each other, but also getting to do some hands-on service. And then we took their picture forever. So one more big number, 10 million.
Number of people served?
It's more than that we serve, yeah, but 10 million
Pounds repacked?
pounds, yeah, each year that we bring in. So we're an average of 10 million. Of course, it fluctuates. If there's a bad crop year, it might go low. If there's a surplus, it might go high. If there's a bad crop year elsewhere in the country, sometimes our produce becomes more valuable, and then there's less to donate. It just really fluctuates, but we do our best to keep it high because the food banks rely on us. Less than 2%. This one's hard. That's actually our overhead. So because our staff is so small and we don't own anything again, we are able to put the dollars that we get right into it, and then we try as much to get things donated. So almost always the produce is donated. Sometimes that we need to pay for example, potatoes just can't go right to Northwest Harvest. They have to be washed first, otherwise the dirt gums up their conveyor belt. So sometimes we have to pay for something like washing or picking even, but we try and keep the cost very, very low. So that model works so well for those really large farms and packing houses. But what we were finding then is there are actually 38,000 small to mid-scale farms in Washington alone, which just is phenomenal. So that's the guy or gal who has maybe 3 acres or 10 acres or 100 acres, but not the huge farms. So how do we work with them? They don't have the same ability to load to have us bring in a semi-truck because they don't have a semi-truck's worth. And often that produce is still on the vine or in the tree. So we've got farmers like Tommy who called us and said, I've got this kale. It needs to come out of the ground today. It's perfectly edible, but I need to plant something new tomorrow. Can you do something? And in the early days, it would have had to have been, no, we can't. But about 8 years ago, we said, we can't let that go. We can't let all these farmers surplus go. So we came up with a new program called Harvest Against Hunger and said, let's not let all this highly perishable, very desirable, sometimes very expensive crops go to waste, and keep it very local and help teach food banks at the same time to capture it. So Harvest Against Hunger, we decided to start, it's a connect and collaborate again. The program works like this. We send in AmeriCorps Vista for 3 years, a different person each year usually, and they teach the food banks how to fish, so to speak. But in this case, the fish is the produce. So we teach them how to work with farmers, how to find partners, how to find volunteers, set up gleaning programs. And if you don't know gleaning, it's an age-old practice. It's actually mentioned quite a few times in the Bible and in several other older documents. It's the practice of letting people go in after the harvest to get what's left. And so sometimes that's just a little because it's what wasn't quite ripe yet or what was on the margins, but sometimes it's a whole crop that just didn't have a buyer. And it's a brutal, brutal industry. Farmers have told me stories of, for example, being asked to produce a very specialty crop, broccolini or kohlrabi or something, by a restaurant, spending the time to plant it and grow it, and then the restaurant says, never mind, we got a new chef, we changed our menu, or this other guy sold it to us cheaper. And then they're stuck with it because the buyer they counted on is gone. So then we say, okay, we'll send in a crew of volunteers, we'll pick it, and we'll bring it to the food bank. So it takes a little persuasion. Sometimes the farmers are nervous. Well, what if someone falls? What if someone gets hurt? What if they get sick from my produce? Luckily, the Good Samaritan laws should protect them unless they were grossly, grossly negligent, which most of the farmers are not. So these fine folks, AmeriCorps Vista, if you are familiar with the program, it's like domestic Peace Corps. So we send them in. They're basically full-time volunteers. They get a very small stipend, enough to sort of live on. It's poverty level for sure, and it's amazing service that they give to our country. So many of the folks are fresh out of college, but we do get occasional older volunteer as well who's retired from a primary career and wants to either switch gears or just give back. And so we send them out for 3 years, and we've got sites around the state, and it rotates every 3 years. We've had at least 2 or 3 in this area. EFN has had one, Mother Earth Farms, teaching them to have their own gleaning program. So we go in for 3 years, but that's not the end of it. It's just in 3 years they create, build, and then sustain, and then we launch that little fledgling birdie and give it back to the host site, and it's theirs forever to make how they want it to be. So right now we have a site in City Fruit, and that's in Seattle. We have a site in Spokane, in Everett with the VOA, in Vancouver, so we're all over. Kitsap County has a program with the WSU Extension Office. Port Townsend. Colville, which I had to look up on the map even though I was born in Washington because I didn't know that place. Fort Angeles, and one that we're kind of excited about in South King County, so out in Maple Valley. We were given the piece of land that we could have, and we, as an agency, started a food bank farm and then handed it over to the South King County Food Coalition with our Harvest Against Hunger promise for 3 years. So that farm is in its just finished its first full year, and it's going to serve all the food banks in that area, completely growing only for the food bank and modeled off Mother Earth Farms here in Pierce County. So it's very exciting work, and he's very proud of his work too. So that's I'll give you that one. That one's how many pounds Harvest Against Hunger has brought in since it was started just 7 or 8 years ago, and has drawn in a huge number of volunteers across the spectrum. So kids, teens, adults, and seniors have all volunteered for the program. And that's one of the exciting things. Is what we found was that the typical volunteer for food banks and hunger relief was in their 70s to 80s, which is totally awesome that seniors were interested in that. But that you can see the logistics of, as people age out or are no longer able to do it, there wasn't younger people taking their place. So one of the things we're really proud of is we're training volunteers to engage in hunger relief. A lot of millennials aren't as interested in hunger relief as they are in food waste reduction, and we can meet that need as well, because whatever we collect for the food bank is that many pounds not going into waste. So we're finding we're meeting a lot of needs for younger volunteers who want to help, but weren't necessarily wanting to go to the food bank and hand out food. They weren't comfortable with that, or they just weren't interested in that. They are interested in going out and harvesting and knowing that those pounds are not going in the dump. Another program we have is we have this Harvest Against Hunger Summer Vista. So every summer they cut back how many AmeriCorps Vista there are in the summer, but we are granted an average of 10 every summer. We put those out in our past host sites, so one in Tacoma again this year, and 9 others across the state, and all they do is harvest all summer long. So they lead those teams, and they get people out picking the produce when it's most available, and then they leave with an educational stipend, and the food bank has had a free person basically for 3 months. So it's a win-win situation. Plus, I mean, how awesome of a job would that be, right? It's to get to go out every day for the summer. And then this year we piloted something new, so we used an NCCC, which is like the same type of program that built the Public Works during the New Deal. It's still going, it goes under this name now, and the teams travel around and they just do manual labor, so they build stuff basically. So they started at Elk Run Farms, the food bank farm we started, and then they went over to Growing Veterans, which is up in Skagit County. And it's a veterans training program, so when veterans return home and are not assimilating well, they get them out and grow stuff, and it's very cathartic, and then all that food goes to the food bank. So we sponsored that, got that going, and huge response to that, and the team was they worked so hard, it was just amazing. So we will do that definitely again. And then our last sort of newish program is farm to food pantries. So we were finding that a lot of those small farmers, those 38,000 small farmers, are barely making it. They just, there's no profit margin for them. And they, some of them said, we could get food stamps for our own families. We just don't make a huge profit. So instead of only being the charity recipients, food banks wanted to be a customer as well. So we worked with the WSDA, got funds, and were able to give 6 food banks, and this year it'll be larger, small grants that they could use to contract produce. And what we found is once there was a contract, the relationship changed. So instead of just being sort of the hands out to the farmers, the food banks were able to be partners. So they were customers and charity recipients, and that changed the dynamics. So suddenly the farms that had been sort of hesitant to donate, just not sure of their profit margin, said, here's the produce you contracted for and you paid me for a really good rate, here's a whole bunch extra that we had left over. And so suddenly those folks were friends, and we're able to talk a lot more, and a lot more produce got donated. So it was sort of a win-win on that as well. So Rotarians out in the field, Rotarians started this, Rotarians bringing in younger folks to donate, to volunteer is a huge change in the way that food banks and food recovery has been done, and we're really proud of our work, and we wanted to share it with you because we do it in your name as well as our own name. We're all Rotarians, and we do it for the whole state, and in fact we often give our overflow to Oregon, to Idaho, and then to several other states we're actually expanding, and so you'll often see our pictures in Rotary International and Rotary Foundation's literature. They don't give us any funding because we don't fit their funding model, but they use us all the time. So we wanted you to know the work, because in the end of the day, it really comes down to, you know, like that dad and that little boy is making sure when somebody needs some food that there's some there, and it's not just any food, but it's something nutritionally valuable for them. So if you want to join in with us, you can find more. We've got postcards on the table. We're always looking for connections. So if you know a farmer who might donate, a trucking company that might join in, trucking school, if you would like to come party with us, we have an annual wine tasting in February. We're always looking for winery partners. So if you happen to know a winery partner or someone who might want to join in the live auction during that, we're happy to have that too. And then if you check us out on our website, we have a once a month work party in Kent at Northwest Harvest Warehouse, and in South Seattle at Food Lifelines Warehouse. So there's some opportunity to be one of those Rotarians in the picture, sorting the apples or scooping the peas.